All right, everybody, what is going on? This is the Lone Chemist Podcast, episode 21, I believe. So, yeah, we can drink now. It's crazy. We were barely legal a couple weeks ago, and now we're moving on to adulthood. This podcast, yeah, it's one of like 55 dad jokes I'm gonna make in this entire podcast. So you better get used to it, buddy. My name is Johnny. I'm the Lone Chemist, and I have another person who stole my name, which is very upsetting. I'm just kidding. I have Jonathan from a channel called Make Stuff.
Actually, we just rebranded as the Better Chemist, so
the
I'm gunning for you.
well, like maybe like the antonym for the Lone Chemist is like maybe the included chemist or like the happy chemist or some shit.
The chemist with friends.
Yeah. The camaraderie chemist maybe. Yeah, like
I'm down for it.
like so when I first made my channel, I called the Lonely Chemist, and like I'm a PhD student in chemistry, so like a lot of it is lonely. So I'm not saying that I'm like a depressed lonely man, but like I felt like that was a little bit too hard hitting, so I decided to change the Lone. And also I'm a big fan of the Lone Ranger, so Lone Ranger, Lone Chemist. So
Nice. I was gonna say Lonely Chemist sounds redundant to me as a
fuck off. But yeah, so for people watching, if you don't know him already, Jonathan runs a channel called Make Stuff, and I actually was unaware of his channel until recently. I saw a video on The Last Jedi. So people who watch my channel, they know that I have some very strong feelings about The Last Jedi, but it's not like the vociferous, visceral complaints that people always give to The Last Jedi. I actually look at the plot and the writing and stuff instead of just having this broad criticism of the movie, which kind of doesn't really make any sense, to be honest. But the really interesting thing was, even though I don't have the most favorable opinion of the movie, I really enjoyed your video because, like, I think it was like in the first 2 or 3 minutes of it, you made this point where like you contextualize it in just the love of a Star Wars movie, and like you actually say, I feel sad that you don't like the movie as much as I do, but don't just shit on it just for the sake of convincing people to hate it as well. Like, and like that kind of spoke to me because I feel like a lot of discourse related to film entertainment generally is just, I don't know. It's always based on the fact that like you almost like want confirmation bias, where you want people to just agree with you because you want your opinion validated, which I think is just so fucked because film is by its nature a subjective medium. So I really like that. And even though I'm not like the biggest fan of the movie, I still loved your video, and I ended up watching a bunch of your stuff and fanboying for like an entire night after I saw that. But yeah, nice. Man, you did some really awesome stuff, and like I said to Bailey when he was on here like about a month or two ago, you're a creator that like I look up to because like I want my channel to be as pervasive and as big and as really awesome as yours. But also I'm fucking jealous because you have like some awesome clout and some really good insightful stuff. So. Yeah, I'll just rapid fire compliments, because we have the same name, basically, is what, the thesis of this conversation
is.
That's
the secret. See, you're halfway there. That's it. You got the hard part done. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it is, with a lot of my videos, it is very much a matter of, like, me trying to disguise some sort of ethical or societal thing that I want to talk about, in like the guise of talking about film or TV or music videos or whatever, which it's actually sort of more to keep me sane, because like I want to talk about these things, but also I don't want to do like a fucking I was a philosophy major for 4 years, and it's just like
that makes so much sense of the style of your videos then. Yeah, no, I'm serious. And like, I'm a chemist, but like, chemistry by its very nature is somewhat existential. So like I've always been I've always really dug philosophy, and like I've always said that like, if I wasn't going to do film or science related stuff, I would probably do something in like the deep humanities, like existential philosophy. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's awesome, dude. But go on. Sorry, I completely cut you off.
No, that's the one thing that like being a philosophy major for so long made me realize is how much it sucks to read philosophical papers, and like the things that always stuck with me so much more and were always so much more effective, not just to me but with any audience, is something with a story and something with some kind of point to connect to. I mean, like like the people who are good at philosophy are the ones who can come up with, the best analogies and the best what was it that Plato did? Uh, but
Allegories, yeah.
allegories, yeah. And it's something that, like, that's the thing that makes people wide stream actually listen to it
Yeah,
and
for sure.
understand it better. And so, but yeah, and then also it's just like with Star Wars, I was like, I really want to talk about just how toxic so much online interaction is, and and also I don't want to spend, because I spend like a month on each video or whatever. It's like I don't want to spend a month just talking about that, so I'm gonna introduce something that I love into it that will bring other people who love that thing into it and give them this sort of like into this conversation. So yeah, so a lot of my videos are pretty much summarized by like, okay, I'm going to talk about some kind of, or at least I try to talk about like some kind of wider technique, which is something I love about your videos a lot too. I feel like your Tarantino video is like this weird, like perfect, like sibling to my This Is America video,
Yeah, dude.
where
Yeah, I actually like. I wasn't into the Tarantino video, but like, I really fucking dug that video, man. Like,
thanks.
yeah. But please go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, because both of them are like, it's very much about that the term you use was
Conflicting
conflicting
tones.
tones, and
Yeah.
I pretty much just replaced that with juxtaposition, and it's just like uh again, it was just like, okay, I want to talk about like this cool phenomenon of like putting these two things together that don't belong together and create this whole other experience. And uh and so I think that that's where like there's a lot of overlap between the stuff we do, where it's just like I it's applying uh that sort of theme or subject of the video to other films. I think that that's a big problem with a lot of video essays or criticism, is saying like, okay, we're just going to look at this individual thing and ignore how it might apply to any other film or how to expand upon
Oh
that,
yeah.
and just focus, like laser focus on the context of this film. And that doesn't feel like worthwhile criticism to me, because it's like, okay, well, the film's already made. They're not going to go reshoot the film because of your
Yeah.
criticism, so it needs to be applicable to other things. And so that's always been a main goal for me, is just here's the thing that I really want to, starting with that subject matter and with that theme or lesson, whether it's creative or ethical or whatever, and then finding the cool thing to wrap that in that's going to get people engaged. And yeah, you've done a super good job of that so far.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm blushing. My camera's not that great for the live stream setup, but I'm beat red. But I really like what you brought up, where it's like, so I went to a liberal arts college, and even though I majored in chemistry, I took a lot of humanities, and so
Yeah.
reading a paper on utilitarianism and like pragmatic implementation of like certain identity philosophies and stuff, like
Hmm.
yes, like we're fucking dorks and we can like geek out about that kind of stuff, but in the general
Right.
populace, even though those things are intensely relatable and actually indicative of how people live in the world,
Hmm.
people don't really they either don't care to understand it, or they just are not interested in that kind of like jargon. And so like
Right.
a perfect example of that is Thanos. Like in my video essay,
Yeah.
like I talk about the fact that his motives are justified because he basically is almost a utilitarian, where like he looks at the
Yep.
best possible outcome for that specific situation. And even though it's a monstrous act, you can actually dissect the philosophy of someone like Thanos pretty easily, because it's the application of a really really widely used philosophical trope. So like
Yeah.
yeah, and that's I had no idea you're a philosophy major. That's pretty awesome, because like yeah, actually that actually kind of blew my mind, because that makes so much sense like, for your videos, because I bring some of that to my videos too. Obviously you're more eloquent and like more well established than me and shit, but like I always appreciate like the mark of a video essay being amazing, as like you focus on an element and then you're able to didactically take each part of it and apply it to a different concept, but
Yeah.
still have like a convergent stream of consciousness for it. So like that's
Right.
why I don't jive with video essays that are like how to write blank type of character. And like
Yeah.
that comes off as like it's not even like it's like mealy mouth. It's almost like it comes off as like it's so like a declarative because you're saying this is the only way you can actually have this thing be written in this specific way, and
Yeah.
like it just comes off as like really petty almost, if if that makes any sense. And
Yeah.
yeah, and like what I want to do with my channel, like, and I have a bunch, like I told you for the podcast, I have a bunch of fucking video essays that I just haven't finished yet, but
Hmm.
they all come from the fact that like I look at a technique or like I look at like a certain
Right.
mantra of a movie, and then I explore that as deeply and as coherently as I can. I don't make like some kind of bland statement like, how to edit to make comedy or some shit.
Yeah.
That makes you seem like you're trying to be overly declarative in your language, and yeah, I think that like video essays just in and of themselves should have like a more coherent thought process and actually look at like a conceptual manifestation of something and then apply it to something instead of like this really broad categorical thing.
Yeah, which I'm seeing more and more in video essays, especially with the whole objectivist criticism thing that's sprouting up all over the place, where it's just like, oh yeah, there are rules. This is bad cinematography. This is good editing. This is bad writing, and it's one of those things where I think that my videos a lot of the time uh, can be sort of unsatisfying in the sense that I make a point to never be like, oh, this thing always works. This thing like because
Yeah,
you make amazing points in your Thanos video, but if someone were to look at that and was in treated as a checklist without any sort of context to the story or anything and was just like, okay, my villain is this and this, then that doesn't make it for sure that this is going to be a
exactly.
brilliant villain because there are so many variables and emotions and like it is I feel like you can make the argument that it's objective, but with with such an absurd amount of variables that
Yeah,
it might as well be subjective because we're not going to wrap our heads around this thing like creativity or what evokes specific emotions. I mean, that's what like psychology has been trying to do that for it. That is like one of the most like influx like fluid sciences is because like it is so case by case and
totally
like
agree.
and so yeah I've made such a point to kind of be like I did an up versus a rival video and that was
Yeah,
very much on like here's something that's simplified and cartoonish versus something that's hyper realistic and very experience driven and then at the end of the video I'm like, hey, which one's better? Whatever, both of them are super good and
yeah,
do whatever, like both of these things can work. And that was me sort of unconsciously before like the whole wave of pro like logic based criticism came about, uh, or at least the current wave, because that's been a thing that people have been arguing for thousands of years. But yeah, it's this. I've always been very like almost morality first with a lot of it,
sure.
or just like or empathy first, where I'm like, uh, where it's very much a matter of making sure that you are not basing something off of some dumb rule that you heard once
Yeah,
and really focusing on the context of the thing and and how it might affect people here and now, because that's another variable in art and film and everything is what's society like right
yeah,
now, because a lot of things that were considered perfection back in the day, it's just like that has totally different meaning now. And so yeah, it's always changing, and that's why I try to sort of foster this. I've been very conscious of the audience that I've been building, and I try to kind of I know that you talked with Bailey about like uh second get like trying to sort of censor yourself in a way that's like, oh, people on YouTube are gonna hate that. Like that is a constant thought. Where especially with the Last Jedi video, I was like, if I say this one thing, then that's where everyone turns against me, and I get eaten alive. And but that's always something that I've kind of forced myself to do. Where I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a like, oh my god, I got so much hate for saying that Nazis are bad in my Avatar video. I say twice that I mention Last Jedi,
Yeah.
and then I say twice that Nazis are bad people, and people, and I got so many comments that are just like, oh well, why don't you mention communists as bad people, or like, oh, if you, like you're a hypocrite if you don't
Dude,
empathize with
that
Nazis,
is that
and
is my
it's just
biggest that's my biggest fucking trigger, dude, where it's like, oh my
mm-hmm,
god, I hate that shit. Where it's like, just because like you're not talking about a certain thing does not mean that that thing is not bad. Like
right.
all they're doing is just fucking whataboutism. Like they're just doing
Yeah,
a
yeah,
fucking
yeah. They're
like,
distracting from like, oh well, you can't call Nazis bad because you have to call out every. That's almost like that whole like the shit that parents pull, where it's just like there are kids in Africa that are going without meals right now, and you're whining about a thing, where it's just like that's not a valid response to a thing, because it's like there are also other people in the world that are happier than me, so I should never be happy about anything. Like there, it is this fucking bizarre backwards, like it's a conversation ender, like an
yeah,
attempted
for sure.
conversation ender, where it's just like, I'm gonna ignore any points you're making and just be like, oh well, there's this other thing, so you're a hypocrite or whatever, and it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
make
yeah.
any sense.
It's so stupid because like, and this circles back to like just general film critique. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I may take issue with a couple of your points you brought up earlier because like while I don't think that like there's an objective guide for good cinematography, something
Mm-hmm.
like The Room, like you can look at that and say, okay, the thing is framed really, really poorly. You can't even see the actors in a lot of the shots. So like,
Right.
I wouldn't say it's objectively bad, but what I would say is like it's not compelling in terms of like a cinematography medium,
Right.
at least in my opinion. But like,
Well, no, and I
yeah,
agree with you, but I think there's also, I think that there should be, because it ultimately, I mean, that's the thing that I learned immediately with philosophy is 99% of the time it just comes down to definitions
yeah,
and an agreed upon term. And so I think the problem is with good and bad, where look at The Room. Like you ask my wife, like, because I always, the thing you always hear is, oh, so if it's all subjective, then The Room is just as good as the guy. But it's like, if you ask my wife which movie she enjoys watching more, she has a better time with, she'll say The Room over Godfather every time.
yeah.
And it's like, you you look at the absurd cinematography in The Room, and like one of my favorite things is towards the end when he's like knocking shit over and freaking out. There's a shot where it's like next to a mantle, and he knocks everything over, and a painting like falls over and lands on the camera and is stopped by the camera, and is like such a dumb, ridiculous moment. But because of that, it in its own way is so effective at making me laugh so fucking hard.
Oh, for
and
sure, 100%.
and so then you're really getting down to uh like, and you can, if you define that as bad, then go for it. But then there are also people that like uh intentionally do that type of thing to evoke a specific emotion. And that's where I have trouble. Like, you look at something that oh man, what, there's I think a Mel Brooks movie that there's a part where it's like zooming in, High Anxiety, where it's zooming
Oh
in on
yeah.
this, doing this like classic Hitchcock slow dolly in on this window, and then the camera hits the window and breaks the window, and then like awkwardly backs away, and like all the actors look at the window because the camera just broke it. Where it's just like, that to me is fucking brilliant. And like,
Oh, oh,
to
oh,
have
oh,
to
oh,
call that bad.
and trust me, I wasn't saying that like The
Oh
Room is
no, yeah,
objectively a bad film or like,
right, right, right.
but what I'm trying to say is like now we're getting to like really fucking existential shit where it's like fucking
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
this is where it always goes with
Oh,
me. Don't worry.
for sure. Dude, like I haven't talked about fucking philosophy like in like a serious way for fucking years. So this is like porn to
Hmm.
me. But like, fucking, there's there's a difference between like Mel Brooks like using that device as like almost pseudo breaking the fourth wall, where like
Hmm.
it's take like the camera in a lot of movies is seen as almost like coldly omniscient and is like basically
Yeah.
it basically is another force of the movie, like it's a
Yeah.
window into like life. But having something like Mel Brooks doing that, like that's him acknowledging that it's all fabricated reality, which I think is really fucking clever because like
Right.
even though they're paying homage to something that's like a huge cinematic trope, they undercut it with that joke because like it's like, oh shit, like they just broke a window. So
Right.
but back on the room, like let me be clear,
Hmm.
like the room is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life. And like
Hmm.
and like like people can like I think The Departed is a perfect film in my opinion. I'm not saying for everybody, but in my opinion, I think The Departed is like as close to
Hmm.
perfect as a film can get. But I
Right.
know that not everybody feels that way. I know that
Right.
not everybody likes the editing choices and the dramatic cuts in music and like
Right.
the dichotomous volume levels between scenes. Like it like kind of hits you in the face when you go to a different scene, like when you're inside or
Yeah.
outside. Like for sure, that's all subjective. It's all subjective. But like it's I'm trying to think of how to word this. It's like there's cinematography that I feel like is more academic or maybe competent. I know that sounds like more pretentious to say it like that, but
Hmm.
for example, like if you compare something like Blade Runner 2049, for example, like
Hmm.
the Roger Deakins spent hours thinking about how he was going to fucking frame every single shot. And
Yeah.
when you have something that's accidentally brilliant, like The Room, where like the camera is its own thing and it doesn't really mean to be because they didn't know what the fuck they were
Yeah.
doing and it's crashing into stuff, and like Tommy Wiseau shoots himself in the mouth with like a blank gun,
Right.
those things are obviously accidental because they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, but it's also
Hmm.
genius because it subverts an expectation and makes the audience laugh their asses off. So, um, yeah, like it's you bring up an interesting point where like um evaluating a movie as objectively good or objectively bad, I think is harmful for just analyzing movies these days. Which,
Yeah.
yeah, like I don't know how people are gonna get away from that because like especially with this whole thing with critic culture where like people ride on the backs of a review to whether or not they're gonna go
Right.
see a movie, and they say like, oh yeah, the visuals are lackluster. Okay, well, what are you talking about? Like, do
Right.
you have
Right.
do you
Right.
have proficiency in that certain visual cue they use? Like, do you know the specific color grading they're using? Um,
Hmm.
yeah, like subjectivism versus subjectivism in film is another example that we were talking about briefly for the podcast is Vice.
Hmm.
Vice has been smacked by critics. Like,
Yeah.
and you can chalk that up to like things falling on political lines, and maybe people aren't really receptive to
No,
the whole kind
definitely.
of the whole kind of zany biopic style that Adam McKay has. Me
Right.
personally, I thought the film was fucking brilliant. I'm not saying it's a perfect
Hmm.
film by any means. That has many flaws, and like there are things that I would do differently if I were behind the camera.
Hmm.
But for me, it struck this amazing balance of like being centered in reality, but also being completely aware of itself and being self-deprecating, and also implicating the audience as almost a character. Where like
Yeah.
they're speaking directly to the audience and say, hey, Americans are fucked up, and I won't spoil like how he does it, which is it's just brilliant. But yeah, like I fully am on board with the fact that I can think the movie is genius and really insightful and really impactful, and not everybody has to feel that way.
Right.
Yeah, like I feel like yeah, like I guess a more insidious example would be like Zack Snyder, where like literally it's the most polarizing set of films that I've ever seen in my
Yeah.
entire life. And like if
Yeah.
people like the films, I have no problem with that. Um but if you disagree and say that like, I wasn't a fan of this, you get immediately taken out back and shot like Old Yeller.
Exactly. And I think that's the unhealthy part because what I like to do, especially with uh a lot of that quote unquote objective criticism is claiming to be based in logic, right? Like that is the whole thing. I
Yep.
think to speak of he who must not be named, Mahler, he like I think at some point he said like it's he's annoyed by emotions and having like he just wants to look at a film purely logically. And I think that inevitably that's the thing where it's just like it is like my instinct is okay, let's take it to the logical extreme with every one of these criteria you're making. And I think that The Room is such a good example because obviously it makes so much sense to be like, oh yeah, it's bad. And like you said, we're talking about Roger Deakins and how he puts in so much effort and so much brilliance and so much experience into everything he does
Yeah.
versus and to compare it to The Room's cinematography, it feels so so outmatched, and like it feels wrong to call it like, to say they're on the same level. But
Yeah.
then you start the can of worms that comes with that is, first of all, you're getting into the intentions of like, because you said, that Tommy Wiseau kind of stumbled into this genius. Like that's what a lot of people think. It's like, he didn't, he was trying to make a drama and he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. But then you get into this sort of unknowable area where, look at, he could be Andy Kaufman. Like he could be someone that is so thoroughly committed to who he is and what he creates, and to like, you could very much make the argument, if that was the case,
Keep talking, by the way. I have to plug my
okay,
computer. Keep talking.
go for it. But he'd make this argument that like, that you're trying to know his oh wait, I can say whatever I want now. And that's why Hitler was right. Oh man, I can't believe you missed that.
I knew you were gonna
Oh
meme
my
me.
God.
I literally am like, I'm gonna take my one earbud out for like 5 seconds, and I'm gonna come back to a fucking spicy meme.
Oh god, oh no, but yeah, so that's what I was saying is you get into this intentionality, and that's one thing that I've seen around the one of my least favorite arguments, which is that because I think plot holes matter if they take you out of the movie, 100%. But the idea that plot holes existing, whether or not they have an effect on your viewing experience, makes the film worse. And I think that there's, again, you're getting into this whole intentions thing where if Tommy Wiseau, if we find out that Tommy Wiseau pulled Joaquin Phoenix and has been like, this has been orchestrated by him the whole time, do we still call that bad? And is that still like,
or is he the greatest troll who's ever lived?
Yeah, did he just top Mel Brooks in that brilliance of this being highly orchestrated? And then the other side of that coin is like, okay, if it's based off of intentions, then like, first, a writer or a director could say, oh, all those things that how you read the film, that's what I intended. Like, after you say those things, like, yeah, no, that's exactly what I intended. So does that mean they are 100% successful and they made the perfect film because it did the exact things that you interpreted from it?
It was emotive in a way where it coincided with your actual reaction to seeing the film. Yeah, so it's like, it's almost like they're kind of like Tom Wiseau, like from what I've read about like the inception of The Room, it's like it took many months before Tommy Wiseau actually said, oh yeah, it's supposed to be a comedy. Where
right.
like people just call that disingenuous, but like I feel like at that point you kind of just surrender to the fact that you're kind of post hoc justifying what the film is supposed to be. Like
exactly.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think that's and then also you get into the problem of like, because you're in that situation, you're giving so much power to the author of whatever you're reviewing, to where you're basing it so much on intention, that look at, if you ask like, if someone were to ask you, hey, do you think your videos are perfect? Like, I know you're very self-deprecating, and so you would say like, oh no, there's this problem, and everyone who's ever created anything can look at the thing and point out, oh, there's this flaw, there's this flaw, there's this thing wrong, there's this thing wrong. And most people who create things don't even want to look at the thing they created a year ago because they think it's garbage. So then does that mean if we're basing it so much on intentions, like they clearly did not achieve the thing they were intending to
Yeah,
achieve
that's true.
because it's pretty much unachievable. So again, you get into this whole uh you'll notice that the underlying theme here is the if you take these things to the logical extreme, it is so messy and there's so many variables that like I just it's hard to call anything objectively good. And one more point on that whole the Roger Deakins versus Tommy Wiseau thing. Another thing I find really interesting is I've always thought about heavy metal and like versus let's say Jimi Hendrix.
Yep.
So Jimi Hendrix was self-taught. He was only 26, 27 when he was 27 when he
Yeah.
died, right?
Yeah. 27.
And so like in his early 20s, he would improvise a lot of his solos and he would make some of the most beautiful, amazing music ever made. But he didn't, compare that to a heavy metal guitarist who spends a year writing a solo and it
Yeah.
is 10 times faster than a Hendrix solo
Yeah.
and it is like and he spends so much time perfecting it and he's putting in all that effort and that experience he has into this thing, but the odds are it's not going to be as good as that solo because there's always this like that's not the end of the criteria for what makes something good. And so like that's always felt to me to with that argument with plot holes of like, well, we're really saying that we're giving more credit to the people who put in the time to make a foolproof story versus the people who kind of half-assed it and didn't make sure everything logically lined up. Like, Hendrix might have misplayed a few notes and he might have, and like I said, like he didn't have the years and years of experience. He didn't have necessarily the absurd amount of discipline that metal player might have. And it wasn't as efficient, like it wasn't as technically perfect
Or intricate or anything like that.
yeah, exactly. And it might not have taken as much, like he might not need the speed to do it and stuff like that. So like on paper, you should be able to say like, oh yeah, that heavy metal musician, that's the better guitarist and that's the better solo. But like then you listen to him and it's like I there has to be something else there that we're not factoring in beyond that. And I mean, and there's it's that whole argument of like, oh, compare the Mona Lisa to a drawing that a 7-year-old did, and obviously the Mona Lisa is going to be better. But it's like I haven't seen that 7-year-old's drawing in the same way that like I can't discount Jimi Hendrix for being the less experienced one, and he's still going to come up with something better. Where it is such a can of worms, and it's so complicated.
No, for sure, and like also it kind of reminds me of a different example. So one of my favorite, actually probably my favorite band of all time, is Circus Survive. You ever heard of them by any chance?
Yeah.
So I've seen them live 11 times. 11
wow.
times.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm wearing a Circus Survive shirt right now too.
Nice.
Yeah, signed by Anthony Green. No big deal. But anyway, so like,
brag.
So Anthony Green is known in the alt rock and the experimental scene as one of the best vocalists who's ever graced the scene with his voice. And like, if you hear him on the record, he sounds incredible. As he's aged, he's gotten a little more raspy with his voice because he's a countertenor. I don't know how much you know about like music theory and stuff. A countertenor,
not to the point of countertenor now.
So a countertenor and anti-tenor basically is like it's a tenor on steroids. It's a massive range of a male voice, and like it's like this wailing, whining, and like super ethereal way of singing. And so if you hear him on the record, he sounds like a bird. Like he sounds beautiful. And even though you may disagree with his tone or placement of his vowels and stuff, you can tell that he's a very skilled singer. If you see that same person live, I like that it's not perfect, right? Because like he's dancing around, he's being boisterous, he's not adhering to the melody as if you were just to play the song in public or whatever. And so and now let's contrast that with looking at a live performance that's clearly flawed and clearly you lose some of the intricacies to, I guess, emotional manifestations. But then compare it to someone like Ariana Grande. Like she's a person who I'm in that level of music, but I can tell I'm classically trained. I took voice lessons for almost 10 years. Like, she's somebody who doesn't use autotune, and she sounds pitch perfect on the record.
Yeah,
So is it just the intricacies that are laid bare and that are hit perfectly in every single performance, or does your emotional connection to what the person is emoting actually make a difference for how you perceive it? Because
exactly.
like, if you ask a perfectly objective person, Ariana Grande should be the better singer and should be the more engaging singer to see live. But
Yeah.
if you ask anybody who's I mean, it's kind of a weird intersection of Ariana Grande versus Circa Survive. But if you ask
Hmm.
somebody who's a fan of both of those things, I'm guarantee you'll probably say that Anthony Green gave a more satisfying performance, even though there are those imperfections that. And so,
Right.
like, if you view like, and this kind of goes back to your point, if you view something that's meant to be subjective in an objective manner, there's just a, yeah, it just feels like it's disingenuous because it's taking out an entire part of the equation that relies on subjective opinion and the way you feel about a performance, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, and I think that it's just this basic misinterpretation of what art is for.
Yeah,
Because yeah, I think art is to evoke emotions at the end of the day. Like that's what you can make, like, and that's what I was talking about with like philosophy writing, where it's just like, if you look at it as art, then it's generally shitty art, because it's like I try to read a paragraph of something David Hume wrote, and it's
Hume.
just using all these, like, I have to memorize all of these definitions and terms that he's invented in the first 10 chapters, and I'm spending an hour reading this one paragraph, and I'm just like, what the fuck are you saying here? And he might be making the greatest point ever made, but it's just like, in terms of that point registering with me and me internalizing it and it accomplishing, because at the end of the day it's him trying to not just make this point but convince you of this point.
Yeah,
And so you get into this weird thing of like, well, look at someone else, like, Daniel Dennett is insanely good at using stories to get across philosophical points, or even people like, I hate to say Woody Allen, but a lot of Woody Allen stuff, and even like, look at, oh my God, Denis Villeneuve and
oh yeah,
his, and like the, and with the Blade Runner series and stuff like that, and or even Westworld and stuff like that, like that has said so much more about AI and has made it such like something that people actively think about more and more, opposed to the Chinese room or all these other different like metaphors and stuff, where like, yeah, it's just, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I feel like so much of that always comes down to emotions. And it just, even from a logical standpoint, even if you're trying to be logical and objectivist, it, you cannot deny that emotions will play a massive, massive role in changing anything.
yeah.
And like, I'm sure you know a lot about climate change, and you like, I fucking would love everyone to be objective about that. And but like, the really shitty truth is that if something's going to change, we have to engage people on an emotional level. And it's because so much of it has been screaming at people like, no, you dumb idiots, the world's ending. and please change what you're doing. Like, on that level, like, if we explain the science of that, the people that need to change aren't going to change from that alone. And so
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's such an issue with again, the whole objective. It's ironic because as a philosopher, I fucking love objectivity. I love quote unquote truth, or the closest you can get to it. But like, you have to be so naive to think that emotions aren't going to play a massive role in anything you try to accomplish within a society of emotional people. So it's a
yeah, for
whole.
sure. I will disagree a little bit. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
the climate change argument you bring up, of
Uh-huh.
course, like, people use that as a means of being subjective. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, people. Actually, it's not really a disagreement with you. It's just like basically expanding on your point. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
people view data collection and data interpretation as they can read a paper or a meta analysis or a climate change report, and they
Right.
can look at it and say, "I'm not convinced by the science." when they have
Right.
no so like, and this is like where I think
Right.
objectivity is a little more prudent to say, because
Hmm.
data collection and actual scientific interpretation of data, that is something that, even though it's, I don't want to get like too into like, anti-realism, like for like, scientific thought and mathematical thought.
Yeah.
Basically, it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it's something that a lot of people use like on the anti-climate change thing, where it's like, oh, like we've projected meaning onto, certain numbers, like, so like, there's no reason for something to be, there's no reason for the word two to mean, a duplicative amount of something, right?
Yeah.
And so like they people who think they're like trying to like have a gotcha for the climate change argument, for example,
Yeah.
they'll cite that, and they'll say, oh, well, we projected meaning on these things, so therefore it's a subjective medium, and you can actually criticize it without an objective understanding.
Yeah.
But like that's kind of a fucked way to view the world, because if if you're viewing that as, if you're viewing everything as anti-realist, which I mean you kind of have to at a certain point, just to be
Yeah.
pragmatic, because like there's no reason why bricks are called bricks. Like we've
Yeah.
imparted meaning onto those objects, and we've actually defined those things as they are. But when we don't have a standpoint, like it's almost like if we backpedal long enough, we find a chain of logic where, okay, this is consistent, therefore we can call this true.
Yeah.
And so like when you talk about people like having subjective opinions about objective matters, of course the
Hmm.
objective matter is somewhat subjective, because we've determined what the structure of CO2 is. We've
Yeah.
determined what the term parts per million means in terms of a wide a variant of different climate change studies.
Hmm.
And so like yeah, people try and pseudo nuance pickle you, and yeah,
It is.
it's shitty. Yeah.
It's this weird like semantic dick move where like, because there are some things that we fucked ourselves over by creating a definition that is impossible to fulfill with a lot of stuff. Like I think truth is one of those things where with the universe, like with the popular opinion of what truth is, which is, oh, it is one we know for absolute certain that is absolutely true.
Yeah, it's self-evident.
then
Yeah.
then you cannot you then nothing can be truth, because we've made such an absurd criteria for that thing that can't, like, free will. You get into that talk a lot too. And
That's another topic for another day.
yeah, please. And but that's the thing that I liked about Hume a lot was, and he pissed off both theists and scientists with his
Yeah.
whole like, well, just because the sun's risen every day, we can't say, by that bizarre definition of truth, we can't say that the sun's going to rise again tomorrow, because it is based just upon previous observations. And it's the equivalent of, if you've only seen red apples your entire life, then saying that green apples don't exist, where it's like, yeah, they do, you just haven't witnessed it. And it is more to display this idea of like, lower your definition of truth to something that is actually practical,
Yeah,
instead
exactly.
of instead of like, yeah, like you said, where it's just like, because people are really abusing that bullshit definition that so many people believe but cannot possibly exist, to
Exactly.
use that as a way to disprove literally everything they disagree with. And that's one of those things, with going back to that whole objectivist criticism thing. One, I noticed that the best argument against it, and the way to trap someone every time, is just be like, okay, what's an objectively good film? And please tell me what an objectively good film is by the standards you've established. And the problem is, like, for those people who are like, oh, it's purely based on logic, then you can always point out something by their own standards that cannot possibly meet that
Exactly. Yeah.
criteria, and therefore it's not practical at all, and you've just created a term that is worthless because it applies to nothing. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. And not only that, but like if you're saying objectively good, right? So like
yeah. Yeah.
let's like think about objectively good. That means that, for, if we're gonna boil down the definition to something that's like observable in reality,
Yeah.
objectively good means that everybody who views it and has a brain cell should probably enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
They should have
Yeah.
a like a more or less synonymous reaction to it. Now,
Yeah.
for example, like there are people that think The Godfather 2 is a perfect film, and I can name you an equal amount of people that think it's shit. right?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
those like that nuance, it's like they think they're arriving at some kind of greater meaning of the word truth when literally they're just talking out of their asses and they don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
Yeah, and they're using it as a way to say like I don't care what your argument is anymore because I've said that my thing's objectively true, so whatever you say that disagrees with that is automatically wrong and we
Yeah.
don't have to talk anymore, and it is so toxic for criticism and so worthless and so unpragmatic. Is that a word? I don't know. But
I get what you're saying, but
yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, man, this has been, it's been blowing my mind. Like, goddamn, I haven't talked philosophy in fucking years. Yeah, man, this whole God, it's been pervasive by a lot of people in new media, especially where like they
Mhm.
use it's almost like a rat hole. They view throwing the word there's no objective truth
Mhm.
just to fucking weasel out of an argument without actually addressing the merits of the argument they're actually you know it's worse than straw manning at a certain point. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're not even like trying to engage in an argument where they're trying to argue against a misrepresentation of the idea they're arguing against. They're just saying it doesn't apply to it because I've already decided this thing is objectively true, which is just so
Yeah, it's
shitty
this
because
weird
like
panic button that you can hit
yeah,
on any conversation
eject,
and then
eject,
never be
eject.
wrong. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I think we really need to move towards like the thing that because a lot of people interpret it that as like, oh, there can't be. Well, you're saying that plot holes are fine, and you're saying that bad cinematography is fine, and you're saying that all this stuff is okay. But like, no, I'm just saying change the criteria that's actually useful. Like, for example, with Last Jedi, it's like it is 1,000,000% okay if you say like, oh, the whole Haldo Poe thing, that plot hole, I didn't like it, and it ruined the film for me. Then that's fine because the thing is you're implying an emotional effect that it had. Like
Yeah,
if you were like, "Oh, I was watching it and I loved that whole dynamic and I thought it was great and effective, but technically it didn't logically add up," then you would be making a nonsense argument that would technically be more objective. But the fact that you're saying like, "Oh, this thing took me out of the film and didn't work for me," then you're making an actual productive subjective argument and criticism of the film that should be discussed and thought about and applied to other things of like why in this specific situation does this thing not work, especially when you get like plot holes that totally work. Look at I mean like the classic one is Jurassic Park when the T-Rex comes out of the paddock and
yeah,
attacks them, and then the paddock is suddenly a cliff, and it's just like, yeah, that they just changed the fucking landscape for that, and it makes no sense, but you are so engrossed in it, and that cliff moment is so fucking good
yeah,
and
exactly.
and suspenseful that it's just like yeah, I can't imagine any of these people being like, oh yeah, well that objectively makes no sense, and I would love it. Like the whole scene was great, but after I thought about it, it made no sense. So now I didn't enjoy that scene. Like that's nonsense.
Yeah,
That
yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and there's also like actually let's talk about the Lost Jedi a little bit because
mhm.
we'll move off of the metaphysical and the philosophical stuff and we'll talk about an
Yeah,
actual film, which by the way that was 50 minutes of fucking eargasm porny. I fucking love that
yeah.
shit. We'll do this again sometime for sure. But um, the Last Jedi it's not like I would even say they're plot holes. It's just like
Mhm,
it's like you said, it was not emotionally satisfying to have those beats of the story. Like so,
mhm,
for example, there was a lack of motivation for some of the things that happened in the film. Like for example, the at the end of the Force Awakens, they've destroyed the Starkiller base, and they've alluded to the
mhm.
fact that this is the stronghold of basically all the ships in the First Order. Well, not all the ships, but like a massive part of the First Order's fleet, and also this massive weapon that could destroy galaxies and destroy planets and
Right.
stuff. And so when you have that the film taking place obviously a couple months after the Force Awakens happens, and then there's no reference to the fact that presumably all their ships got destroyed. If they come in with 55 Star Destroyers or
Mhm.
Dreadnoughts, whatever the hell they're called, it just kind of makes the previous film seem a bit inconsequential. And I'm not saying that it's a deal breaker for me. I just thought it was kind
Mhm.
of strange how like we spent the entire film hammering home this point about how we have to kill this fucking base. We have to kill this fucking base, and then we can have subjective opinions decide whether or not like Death Star 2.0 is a good plot point, but
Mhm.
it was just strange because like there was this massive plot point and it just seemed like it was a passing fancy and not really even worthy of being addressed in the next film.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was something that annoyed me about that film. And I'll give some praise first. Like I've said it a couple times, but the throne room lightsaber sequence and like the emotional climax of that moment is fantastic. I think
Mhm.
that even though I do have a different problem with the way that Kylo kills Snoke, I think that the fact that Kylo and Rey are fighting together, and even though the
Mhm.
arcs weren't perfectly established, which I mean, that subjective opinions there, but like, but
Right.
in my opinion, the arcs weren't laid out enough to like have the two Padawans basically join as one. But
Mhm.
the fact that happened and it was emotionally satisfying in that moment was great. And we
Mhm.
can talk about the technical stuff all day. I love the way that he framed the shots, those big ass wide shots with like them all fighting in the background. Like that was really
Yeah.
brilliant stuff. The cinematography for the lightspeed sequence, I have a different problem with that, but just the sheer mastery and the sheer cinematographical, is that a word? I don't fucking know, but like
I understand what you're
yeah,
saying, so it
but
works.
the way that thing was framed and like it was just like jaw dropping. And even though
Mhm.
some of the emotional stepping stones didn't fully work for me up until that point, like it was almost a sublime moment because like legitimately like it's almost like emotionless. You don't know how the fuck to react. It's like you see this
Yeah.
thing like almost like turn into a
Yeah.
fucking comic strip. And another thing that I liked about it, everyone shits on Luke Skywalker in that movie about like he would never abandon his friends, he would never be jaded, he never has an okay.
Yeah.
If you see all of your friends and all of your family and basically everything you worked your entire life for fade away through no fault of
Yeah.
your own, you're gonna be jaded. Like and I agree that even though it's a departure from his character in the original films, I think that there's a great argument to be made that he could that he's reasonably justified in being jaded.
Mhm.
But like my biggest problem with the Last Jedi, and like I said, I really enjoyed your video, and I
Mhm.
I even though I it's not my favorite film of all time, I was thoroughly entertained.
Mhm.
Actually, that kind of speaks to what we were like talking about earlier. Like you can think a film is not perfect and still have an emotionally gratifying reaction to it, right?
Yeah.
Like you can analyze it on two fronts, right? You can say that okay, logical consistency, whatever the fuck that means in the movie,
Mhm.
but you can also think about in terms of your perception of the events and all of the contextual basis considered, is it a gratifying movie to watch? And of course, like I was really invested in the movie. I thought the Rey's character arc was great, but there were just things that I just didn't really buy in terms of the story. And I don't think
Mhm.
maybe it's disingenuous to call them plot holes. I think that it's just things that didn't really like make a gratifying film in my point of view, and that's
Right.
totally fine. Like you can have subjective opinions about the movie as well. I'm not calling you a hack. I'm not calling you an idiot for like having an opinion.
Right.
Um, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Pretty
And
much.
yeah, no, and I think honestly, like I think that is what is so fascinating. I think this is what I love about film criticism, and this is what I love about just talking about film and Star Wars and stuff like that, is that it gives you this perspective. uh it gives you access to other people's perspectives, and
Yeah,
I think that is so much of the value, because so many, like, again, more and more, like you were talking about with reviewers, where they hang on to that review and take that as the truth. And but like, to me, the value of film reviews and the value of talking about this stuff is not to figure out who's right and who's wrong. It's
yeah,
people's perspectives on this and their reactions to this thing. And like, there's stuff that like I find so satisfying. And someone left such a good comment on my Last Jedi video about how they are like a marine biologist, and they watched the Meg, and the Meg was so frustrating to them because they're like, this massive shark isn't, first of all, isn't going to come into that shallow water, isn't going to pick these tiny little people off like gonna go hunt whales or whatever, and it's like a normal shark hunting plankton and stuff like that, and like all of the like, and he was like, it took me out of it. But the thing is, Jaws is one of my favorite movies, and it has all of those same issues, but I love the film because it sells me on those things. And
Exactly.
I have that I have that same emotional I have a stronger emotional reaction, and it does better at selling those emotions to me, that I'm willing to accept these things, that because films are sort of like magic tricks where they're trying to distract you from these logical like holes. And like, I mean, that's what cutting is like, if you cut from someone's at the market and then cut to them at home, then logically you're like, oh, what, they didn't walk there, how'd they get there? And it's just like
Yeah.
this film language of like, oh well, obviously between the cuts you start to understand what how much disbelief you have to suspend. And some films are so much more effective at it for certain people than other people. And like, there's stuff like, one of my absolute favorite examples of this is Return of the Jedi. At the beginning, what the fuck was Luke's plan to get Han Solo back? Because every way you look at it, it makes no goddamn sense.
Oh yeah.
And it's just like uh it's just like, because it's they start off by giving both of the droids to Jabba, because they're trying to save one person from
Yeah.
Jabba. So they're like, okay, first we're going to just give up 2 people. So now we have to save 3 people. And then we're going to have Leia infiltrate them by giving up Chewbacca, so a fourth person that we have to save, even though with Lando there, we've established that we can infiltrate it without giving up
Man.
people. And then Leia's going to try to rescue Han in the middle of the night, and she doesn't succeed at that. But even if she did, she would have 3 other people to save now. And Lando was doing nothing there during that plan. And then it's just like, all of these, and then Luke gets there and gets captured, and everyone gets captured. And the only thing that was plotted out beforehand that actually works for them is the fact that Luke put his lightsaber in R2D2 that shoots it out at the perfect moment. And then they just kill everyone anyway. It's just like, why not just go in there in the first place and kill everyone? It is such nonsense. But watching it for me is just like, no, it is engaging, and it has all these twists and turns, and it is so fun, and I love Jabba's palace. And like, it is so absurd, and on a logical level it is total bullshit. And now, and like, so if I was watching that and I was like, oh yeah, this is fun, I'm not really thinking about it, I accept all the things because it's sold me on them so well, then when someone else comes to me and is like, I could not get into it because this plan made no fucking sense, then my reaction to that should be, that makes a ton of sense that you bring that up, and I understand why you did not like this thing. And that is the value of talking about these things with other people. And for that person, like, I think that where we get into an issue is expecting, when we share our perspective, expecting that other person to automatically adapt our perspective.
100%. 100%.
And
It's like
that's
it's like we brought up before. It's like, you know, people assume that whatever premise they have baked into their mind must be constant because you've vociferously analyzed it in your mind, and you've made every single plot hole abundantly clear in your mind, and you must destroy not destroy the film, but you must eradicate any joy people have in the film. And like okay, for example, one of my favorites of all time, top 3, is Birdman, Michael Keaton. Like, absolute genius film. I actually have a video essay I'm going to post in a couple weeks when I fucking finish it and I have some free time. But people view that ending as such a divisive thing. And like, it's so dependent on how you actually perceive the movie in a really contextualized fashion, because the entire film, Riggin is kind of imparting on the film this sense of magical realism, where like, he, in the beginning of the film, he looks at the light and the light falls on the guy and he dies. He's doing telekinesis and the camera cuts away and then he's just throwing shit. Like, he's spun this narrative in his mind that he's a superhero, but if you view that as matter of fact, you're gonna think it's fucking stupid. And then the ending with Emma Stone, you're gonna think, well, what the fuck? Like she never experienced any of this stuff in the middle of the story. Why the fuck would she do it now? Like, it's illogical and stupid. But if you view it as an emotionally gratifying ending, then, so think about this. It's like, so the reason why Regan feels this way in the film is because he's let himself become a slave to Birdman, right? Like he's his identity and his entire existence is basically born on the fact that he was his character for so long and he can't escape it. It's crushing and it's anxiety fueling. And so the only time he's able to get away from it is when he shoots himself in the fucking face, and then he finally, Birdman says bye bye and fuck you. But then at the end of the film, it's either uplifting or it's really sinister the way that you think about it. Because in the uplifting sense of it, Emma Stone, you perceive that if it's an uplifting ending, as she finally sees her father as transcending this medium of where he's been put in a box, and basically that box has been opened and he's flying away and stuff. But if you view the more sinister side of it, you can view it as she sees the emotional, not that she sees emotional trauma. She witnesses, she looks down and sees her father kill himself, and then the trauma is so great that she becomes as crazy as he is, and seeing all this fucked up things about people flying and like superheroes and stuff. So it's so dichotomous because just based on the way that you actually perceive the entire film, that changes everything about the premise that you've baked into your mind when you finally see the final seconds of the film. But that goes on to your point where it's like people assume that the way they perceive the film has to be correct. And maybe it's hubristic or maybe it's just people are desperate for confirmation bias because they want to feel validated in their opinions. But I mean, people will view the ending if they see it not the wrong way, but like a way that's divergent from other people as pretentious and unfounded in any kind of logic. But for other people who actually buy into the emotional framework of the movie, it's the most satisfying ending of all time, which is so interesting because it's like there's not an objective analysis you can make of that film. Well, I mean, we already established that, but like you cannot say whether or not the ending is satisfying. It's completely dependent upon the way that you perceive the 2.5 hours that came before it, which is nuts.
Exactly. And that's I think so much of it it's this weird two-tiered thing that you touched on, which is like it's a combination of just a lack of humility to where you just do not want to accept being wrong on this. And also I think we've hit this age where it's like answers are so readily available at all times to everything that it takes you do not have to, if there's something you want to know or if there's some knowledge you want to have, then 99% of the time you Google it and you have that knowledge. Now you have access to that thing. And so these ambiguous things become so controversial and so debated because we are so used to that satisfaction of, it wasn't back in the day where it's like, I wonder what kind of bird that is. Now I have to go to the fucking library and search through all these books, and like it's like, okay, I Googled red and green bird and like I get that immediately. And the thing that created that humility for me so quickly was I used to be the biggest asshole about toilet paper and the whole argument of which way toilet paper should face on the roll. And for years,
what was your conclusion though?
My position was the toilet paper needs to go face the front, where you can, like, I had this whole argument down where I was like, okay, there's no conceivable way that anyone is like that I'm wrong about this, because if the toilet paper is facing the front, then you can tear the perforation easier, and it doesn't, like, if it's in the back, you have to like pull it down and like grab at it and tear it, where you can do it with one hand in the front, and it's easier to reach, and
you risk de-applying the toilet paper in case you get not the actual two-sided sheet,
exactly.
God damn, that's woke, dude.
and so I was like, oh my god, this is I finally ended the argument about there's no way that you shouldn't have the toilet paper facing the front. I am 100% confident of this, and I would shit on everyone who, if I went to a friend's apartment and they had the toilet paper the other way, I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you, you dumb idiot? This is so incorrect. Aww. And then
wait, you Charmin shame somebody? Oh, that's terrible. Oh, that's exactly. Evil, dude.
and so I was like, and this is one of those things where I clung on to it so hard because I was like, I finally got the answer to one thing, and I finally have this insight that not other people have, and it's brilliant. Until one day at a party. I was going on my rant about toilet paper because I'm a great party guest. And someone said to me, and it destroyed my world so quickly. Someone said to me, "What if you have a cat?" And I was like, "What? How does that change anything?" And they're like, "Oh, well, if you have a cat, if the cat bats at the toilet paper from the front, it'll unravel all of it. But if it's the other way, it bats and it keeps spinning and it doesn't unravel."
Whoa.
And I was like, "Holy fuck!" You blew my whole world apart. Like there is this thing that made such perfect sense in my head, and I thought about it for so long, and just with that one simple shift in perspective, because I have a dog and not a cat, then it changed everything, and I was just like, oh shit. It turns out, no matter what, I cannot factor in every possible variable, no matter how insanely confident I am of this thing. Like, oh, I'm still a fucking dumbass. and so it gave me such a level of humility that I was like, first of all, I'm very happy that I don't waste so much time bitching about toilet paper anymore. And but it was just like yeah, this thing that I was so confident of that there was no way I could be misinterpreting it is like, oh yeah, no, you're stupid because there's one thing you didn't factor in that you would never factor in. I could have gone the rest of my life without factoring that in if I'd never got it, because I'm allergic to cats. So I could have easily lived the rest of my life without realizing this one thing, and it is because of someone else sharing their perspective with me, that and my being open to that I was like, oh yeah, I was being a self-involved asshole. and and there's no reason to believe this, but I feel like that is so applicable to so much in so many interpretations of so many things, that where it's just like you get this idea in your head where like this is absolutely how it is. And that's one thing that I saw in the response to my This Is America video, because a lot of that is like, oh, this is trying to be ambiguous and it's trying to elicit a certain reaction from the individual and not say necessarily a very specific thing. Like
Yeah.
Childish Gambino was purposely saying like, hey, figure it out on your own. What's the reaction you're having to it? And I got so many of these comments that were like, you dumb idiot. This is obviously what it means. This means this means that. It's so fucking apparent. And then none of those, of the dozens of comments I got like that, none of them were the same from any of the other ones. They were all each individual person saying this is exactly what it means. No one else could, like, everything else is wrong. And so like it just showed me like, okay, well then if that's the case, if one of these people are right, then everyone else in these comments are wrong. And how do you determine which one? It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe it is based off of perspective, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that whole
Yeah.
like The Shining interpretation, and just like there's so many
Yeah.
ways to take it.
Yeah.
Just do
But
what works
dude,
for you.
like, you know what's really scary is like people have that um I guess like the need to be able to justify certain conclusions they've come to, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not tepid things like, you know, a music video or a fucking toilet paper. It's like they're having pseudo objective analysis on issues that are, you know, very, you know, impactful for people. Like for
Right.
like, you know, in my experience, climate change. Like people
Yeah.
people will bake so many fucking things in their premise that even if you show them scientific data, this is the example that I always give about like a.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're talking to a religious person, right? And this is like devoutly religious, like Bible Belt, like pusher. So
Mm-hmm.
they say, you know, I believe in God. I say, okay, well, why do you believe that? And then they respond, why don't you believe it? And then I said, well, I haven't seen any evidence to, you know, proclaim that.
Mm-hmm.
They say, well, of course that's true, but it's why it's called faith. You have to, you know, take things without evidence sometimes to have it be an actual act of faith. And even
Yeah.
though there's a logical fallacy in that in and of itself, I'm like, you walk away, okay, no, sure, whatever. You're entitled to your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Then you next week with the same person, and let's say in my example, like I show them data about climate change. I show them the actual studies where you know, I study basically, without boring you too much. I basically I study what happens when organic vapors, so carbon-based vapors, are emitted in the atmosphere and they interact with like sulfur, nitrogen, and other kind of anthropogenic pollutants. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll show that same person molecular level evidence that compounds are made in the atmosphere as a result of human pollution, and they say, "Oh no, I don't believe that." And they said, "Well, you said before that you need evidence to substantiate things that aren't based on faith. But then they say, no, I hear that. I just choose to believe something different. And
yeah,
you like that's such a fucked way to view the world, where it's like anyone else's evidence for any other kind of claim is extraneous and meaningless to you, which is like you need to be able to digest other people's perspectives, but you also need to be able to not be afraid of being proven wrong, or be afraid of a objective analysis of the data, right?
Right.
And fuck, I don't even want to talk about the arguments I've gotten for climate change. It triggers the ever-living fuck out of me. It really does.
It really is that, like, my least favorite thing here in the fucking world is, well, it is just a theory. It's just like everything is a theory.
But this is my big fucking problem. It is a theory. You're absolutely right. People do not understand what the word theory actually means. Yep. A theory is a very well tested hypothesis, and the emphasis on well tested. Well tested doesn't mean, okay, you run the exact same experiment 2,000 times and 199 whatever fucking times it is, like, except for one, you get the same result. That's not what a theory is. A theory basically means you have a supposition, like originally, which is like people always argue that, oh yeah, well, the original supposition was subjective. But if the original subjective supposition was proved correct, and not just by the person who made the supposition or the hypothesis in the first place, by multiple fields of study. Like climatologists had this mantra where basically human influence global warming, anthropogenic global warming, was caused mainly by humans by emission of greenhouse gases, and since pre-industrial times, CO2 levels have raised by I forget the numbers. I should know this. I'm a fucking hack, I guess. But like I think it's 200 parts per billion, and that's like the farthest or the fastest incline of part per billion rise of CO2 levels in the atmosphere since like Paleolithic era. So when you when you factor all those things in, like you can't just. I don't even know. It's like it's almost fruitless to fucking argue against it, because like they're not even interested in what you actually have to say about the subject. Like all they're doing is just like they have a premise break into their own mind, and instead of looking at premises and then combining them together, have conclusions, they have a conclusion and then they use that conclusion to post hoc rationalize what they've already concluded. So it's self-evident. So like it can't be proven wrong, which is just so fucked, because like how are we supposed to have conversations with people?
yeah And it is such a, that's one of those things where it's like, it is so, the way it has been weaponized is so shitty, because it fucks everything up. Because part of me just wants to be like, okay, let's base it off of the people that we have deemed experts, and the vast majority of them saying it, and then also just the fact that, hey, this is potentially humanity ending. Like, so maybe even if you're kind of on the fence about it, it kind of makes more sense to just prevent the thing, right?
And dude,
don't want people to die.
Yeah, dude, I don't know if he's on my podcast. I had Anton from A Skeptical Human on last week. Great guest. He does like really good arguments and debunking like pseudoscience and shitty arguments.
Right.
The argument that I posed, basically I was saying to him, people that typically deny climate change, again, for the audience, I'm not saying that conservatives are all bad people, but typically it falls very hard on party lines, where conservatives are the ones who vociferously don't believe in climate change.
Yeah.
But it's strange, because if take that a step further, if you're a conservative, the mantra of your ideology is to make everything as compact and as non-changing and as immovable as possible once you achieve some kind of standpoint of stability, right? But what is a bigger factor to conserve other than the planet that you live on? Because regardless of what you think about business regulation, with the role of big government versus small government, really anything, like the fact that you don't want to conserve the very bedrock on which all your premises are laid bare. Yeah. It's really stunning.
It's
because
interesting when you don't want to conserve Florida. I really have trouble, and it's one of those things that clearly the logic is there and people are just ignoring it, like you said, because like my father-in-law is conservative, and he like, I've heard him talk shit about like, oh well, it's dumb that they put on these regulations. Like it's so expensive for us to do clean energy, and we're not going to change anything. But then when you talk to him about immigration, and he's like, oh, if I gave you a bowl of Skittles and I told you one of them was poison, then you wouldn't chance eating any of those Skittles, would you? And it's just
That
like,
is the stupidest argument I've ever heard in my
it is,
life.
it is, and my reaction is always like, well, if all those Skittles are actually human beings that need shelter and have feelings and stuff, then you know what? I'm willing to risk one of the poison ones. But like,
Oh my
it
god,
is.
that gives me a
But then
fucking brain
it's
tumor.
using it's using the exact opposite reasoning there, where it's just like, well, why would you risk the thing if it is true? And it's just like, but what? But we shouldn't, like, we don't even know it's true, so we shouldn't risk it. So at the end of the day, I think it ultimately just comes down to selfishness and whether or not you sincerely care about other human beings. And because I know for a fact, I saw this amazing Twitter thread the other day that was just breaking down the logic of a rich person who has in their incentive to deny climate change. And it's just like, well, that, you know what, that's a predictable market. You put all your factories in a place that's going to be unaffected by it. These other places are going to become more and more deregulated as food and water get more scarce, and therefore the less, because a state of emergency is great for deregulation. So you know, we're going to invest heavily in that, and like all these ways that like you can make money off of the world
Yeah, it's
destroying
so
itself.
fucked.
And so it's just a matter of like, it's just a matter of like, this is, at the end of the day, you just need to uh you know, just go towards empathy and go towards what's best for people instead of what's best for yourself, because so often that's what the argument, they will use whatever broken logic they want to confirm the selfish thing for themselves so
Yeah,
much of the
yeah,
time.
yeah, exactly. And also, like, so if you, this thing really sucks because, like, obviously the empathetical argument is the most effective for most people, but
Hmm.
for them, like, if they're presented with any kind of mantra of empathy, then they accuse you of virtue signaling and you're a fucking SJW liberal cuck beta soy boy fluoride ingesting idiot. But like let's take it a step further then. What if we insinuate not that they're cold and shallow and pedantic, but what
Hmm.
if we frame it in the fact that you are a hypocrite because you are advocating for a thing that runs contrary to the very ideology that you believe in, and then you
Yeah.
really expose them for how hypocritical and how vapid some of those people really are. And of course there are some people on the left too who have opinions like that. For example, like people that scream about identity politics, for example, right?
Hmm.
And then the comedian that I think, yeah, it's some hack on fucking MSNBC who was criticizing Bernie Sanders, and the only basis that they gave for the argument against him is because he's an old white man, and he's not
Yeah.
charismatic and go away. But
Yeah.
you like that just shows how those ideologies, those extremely reactionary ideologies that they fly in the face of fact, and they're not founded in anything except for that ideology being self-evident. They don't look for any kind of empirical evidence to substantiate their claims. All they do
Yeah.
is they have a premise and they want to back it up in any way they see fit, and then they will change the way they perceive data or their commentary just to confirm their own bias, which sucks because like it's not like these are like tepid problems that are going to manifest years and years and years from now. Things like the toxic nature of identity politics, for example, like, you know, shitting on a guy because he's old, white, and Jewish.
Yeah. And then the
And,
fact that
and
you
then with
have
climate
to.
change, like people think
Mhm.
it's a tepid problem, but we're already seeing the implications of the thing that you've already denied now.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
and obviously identity politics and climate change are kind of disparate topics, but the point still remains that like this neglect of their professed internal ideology is so shitty because
Mhm.
like you don't really believe anything.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's the issue, because like, you know, for years I was to this day my number one thing is like, okay, if someone makes the claim, I mean, just with that whole like when I said ask someone what they think is an objectively great film and you can prove them wrong anytime, then you're showing how hypocritical they're being and
Exactly.
how useless that is. But the problem is that with so many people, they fully comprehend how hypocritical they're being, and all they have to do is just decide they don't care about that anymore, and it's the end of conversation. Because how many hypocritical things has Trump done compared to like I cannot if Obama committed a week of any like of the Trump presidency, if he did like any one of those things, like if Obama was caught paying off people he had affairs with to shut them up, he wouldn't have been president for a minute after that. Like
Well, no, he would have been, but he would have been met with extreme opposition on the opposite side of the spectrum.
yeah.
But like,
Can you imagine him being met with extreme opposition?
they,
But
they
yeah,
freaked out over he asked for fucking Dijon mustard. Like it was like it was a hot dog stand where he's like, do you have any mustard? Yeah, I'm not like the Franks. Do you have like Dijon mustard? And people had a fucking fallacious attack against the guy, like he's pretentious. What's more pretentious, asking for Dijon mustard or saying, "quote I am a stable genius"?
Yeah. No, I mean even with I retweeted someone I think yesterday pointing out like how people are freaking out because Malia is their photos surfaced of her drinking at the age of 20 and how scandalous that is, and then like Brett Kavanaugh loving beer at 17 and sexually assaulting women. Totally fine. Like that's the thing is people sincerely don't care about being hypocrites anymore as long as they are in power. And so that is like they'll ignore whatever they have to ignore as long as they get what they want. And it is I don't know, I don't know how you deal with that. And it's one of those things where it's just like, well, that's another reason on the list for why humans are kind of fucked at this point. And it's something that I really like. I try to with my channel instill as much empathy and consideration as humanly possible. And that's one of the few things where it's just like my biggest hope is just for new generations that maybe do not are not willing to lower their standards that far, like try to make as many good people that are not accepting of their hypocrisy as possible. But it is such a like it really feels like a fight that cannot be won a lot of the time. And
Hey,
so
optimistic, man. Be optimistic.
I that is weird because I have such an actively positive channel and it is
I was gonna say like
desperation.
most of your videos are like offering like not unbridled praise, but like you're looking at what you love about a certain medium or a certain film or whatever. And we're cynical assholes for about fucking 45 minutes.
Oh, that's one of those things where it's just like that's sort of my response to it is just like, hey, try to be as positive and understanding as possible. And like honestly that's sort of that's my approach right now. And I've made the one exception to Nazis, as much as everyone criticizes me of like, oh, you're so empathetic until it comes to Nazis. And it's just like those are the people that prey on people being empathetic, and that's how they rise to power. So I'm not going to give them the chance to do that.
Oh, dude, I'm fully on board with those memes, right? Where it's like, there's this whole this theory of like well, it's not a theory. It's basically like it's a rule where like you should not tolerate the intolerable, because like basically you should be tolerant of absolutely everything in society, free speech, different points of opinion, but the only thing you should be vociferously on a basal level, not talking about political ideology, the only thing as like tabula rasa you should be opposed to is intolerance. Because let's say like someone is elected to power and they're like, so what? Like he's a fucking, neo-Nazi fucking whatever, like any kind of terrible ideology. It's fine. Like he's a freedom of speech. It's his own opinion, whatever.
Yep.
But think about it. Like those people, if they're elected to power because of a difference toward their ideology, the tolerant people will not be able to take back the government or like any kind of governing force, because who will take over? The intolerant people would take over, and then they will use that system to hijack freedom of speech engines in order to pursue their own narratives. And I don't know how we're gonna fix that. It's a systemic problem that it's.
And that's the phrase that I've clung to so thoroughly, and that has been like such a guiding light for me, is just tolerate everyone that is not intolerant.
Yeah, exactly.
And just because it's like we have a history That's one thing that people take for granted a lot, is the fact that we saw Nazis rise to power and saw how they did it, and we can look back at all the people who are like, yeah, well, they don't have that much power yet, and we don't know for sure if they're going to do the things that we think they might do. So let's put off doing anything about it until it's way too late to do something about it.
Yeah, I have a
And
cancerous mass, but it's like, not malignant yet, and it's a really small thing on my back, but it's like, it's not really like anything I really need to worry about right now. It's like localized on my shoulder blade, but it's like you're not near my vital organs. It's the same fucking thing. It's like,
yeah,
okay, like sure, let's say a fucking tarantula is in your house and you have a big house, right? Like, okay, you got a big house for sure, but doesn't change the fact that that problem, even though it's small at the moment, is still a problem. Like, you have to actually address the problem instead of just saying, oh, it's lesser in terms of severity than the good people, so therefore I think it just be allowed to fester and exist without any kind of challenge. That's ridiculous on its face. Like you like, just because of the size of a problem, you can't just be blind to it. Like it's really ridiculous, because like, imagine the society we would live in if that was like a common trope for people. Like, like, so what? A guy's beating his wife over there. I'm sure there's probably two sides of that story. So what? There's a guy who's a race realist and thinks that, black people should be exported and, back to Africa. Well, it's fine. Like, whatever. It's his own opinion. Like, we can't not compartmentalize problems just because of the perceived severity. Because, and oftentimes, like we've seen with a lot of people on the internet sphere, those alt-right ideologies, even though they seem like a small amount of people, they're slowly having more and more people come to their side because they're presented in a very favorable light by the media. They're having an unbridled praise on the the poll threads and the Reddit threads and stuff, where people are like, just trying to like grandstand against politically correct culture, but they're really just being indoctrinated into like a really shitty set of ideas. I don't know what we're going to do about that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think a lot of it is a response to that weird, because we're finally fixing a lot of really shitty things in terms of society and what's acceptable, and I think that, like you mentioned with the Bernie Sanders and stuff, I think that pendulum naturally swings way too far to the extreme. You get a lot of people saying, "Oh, men should be dead," and it's just like, that's not the correct way to interpret that information. You get stuff with like Bernie Sanders where it's like, I'm gonna ignore the fact that he was literally arrested at like a race rally, like a non-aggressive protest and stuff like that in the 60s, to say like, oh, he's an old white guy. And like there is such a it's this weird thing where it's like the pendulum swinging the other way, and now it's creating all these sides of the two extremes instead of like it's pushing people in so many different directions. And like, I think that's one of the good things about cancel culture, which has a shit ton of problems already.
Yeah, for sure.
But the fact that the basis of that is like, oh, well, if we're so fed up with it's clearly not going to be made some kind of legal system or something where if you're a racist or you're an asshole, you're, going to jail. But we've kind of compensated as a society of being like, well, if you're a racist and you're an asshole, then you don't get the benefits of us praising you anymore, and we're going to actively dislike you for being that kind of person. And so that's one of the things that kind of fills me with hope, which again, that has been so thoroughly abused, of like, like this person went to this church in like 1978 that also had this person who was a bad person, so I canceled them. You made jokes on Twitter 10 years ago and then apologized for them, and then we found out about them now, so it's like you did it yesterday and you're Satan.
So on a broad sense, I agree with you, because like heinous acts should be met with admonishment. You should not really tolerate those things. But the only thing that scares me about cancel culture, and this will become one of the last things, I have to get back to lab, unfortunately, in a little bit. But one of the shitty things is like the weaponization of allegations is becoming more and more of a factor for people. Like, for example, like after Al Franken was accused of sexual assault and he resigned in the Senate, there were a lot of different threads going on Poll and Reddit and Facebook and Instagram and shit of people on the right who were trying to get Bernie Sanders out of office because like his popularity rating is what is it, 81%, most popular
Yeah.
senator in America by a mile and a half. And so like they view this guy who's like the antithesis of what their leader is. And so there were threads where it's like, okay, we need 9 accusers to get him out of office. Like, who's going to do it? And so like, obviously it's anecdotal, and of course like you have to be a fucking sociopath to fucking make up allegations of rape or sexual assault. Like that's a pretty fucking demonic thing to do.
Too.
What's that again?
They said they did the same thing with Mueller, where there is that whole attempt at trying to get him accused of sexual misconduct and stuff.
And it's just, that's just so shitty because like, you know, me as a person, like, you know, for example, I am fully on board with the fact that the Me Too movement, like, you know, should be able to accuse people without, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. It's like they should be able to say again.
Blacklisting.
Well, yeah. Not only that, but like you should be able to accuse your perpetrator if you bear this cross for so many fucking years and it's ruined you. But on the same token, though, when you have this risk of people, and it's been proven, like people that actually will weaponize allegations, not only do you make the entire sentiment behind the Me Too movement, you know, shitty, you've also delegitimized everyone else that's come out before you, where it's like, you know, why the fuck do you believe any of these people if this person lied about things so easily and so vociferously, which just kind of sucks because like no one wants to fuck. I'll die on this hill. You and I are not advocates of rape.
Speak for yourself, no. I almost killed myself on that hill. But
yeah, but dude,
yeah, no, you know what? I'm not huge on rape.
You know, I was really on the fence with this one, but choice. Yeah, but yeah, it's like it just sucks the fact that like fuck, like they're taking this movement, which of course like has benevolent motives. They want people to actually be able to accuse perpetrators of terrible things that you can't get away with society anymore. But on the same token, like I as an American, like I always adhere to the side of due process where it's like you're innocent until proven guilty. So like, and certain factions of the Me Too movement, even though I agree it's a necessary thing in society, there are factions of the Me Too movement that say you have to prove that you did not do it. But you can't prove a negative. That's a logical fallacy. Like, you know, if I talk to somebody and they say, I flew here on a magical flying unicorn named Bill, and you say, can you prove it? And I say, oh, well, can you disprove it?
Yeah.
I'm like the burden of proof is on me making the fucking bombastic claim. Well, not bombastic, but like whatever a claim is being asserted. And so like people are trying to flip burden of proof on the other person, which kind of flies in the face of judicial justice in general in terms of the courts in America, which it just sucks that we like the fact that we have to worry about like fake allegations. It sucks because like, what are you going to do when someone comes out and they say that they were raped or assaulted or abused? Like, are you going to not believe them? Of course not. But we also have to keep in mind that there is a slippery slope where if we start flipping the burden of proof, then what does that mean for society in general after this whole thing is not done, but like has kind of calmed down a little bit?
100%. And I think the thing that people should, because I know there's a lot of people and I think that it's coming from such a good place, the people who say I'm going to believe the victim. But the thing that I will always point to is if you look at so much of the stuff we've talked about in the last hour and you look at how much the other side of how much bad people will weaponize that exact same thing to do bad things if we don't make it perfect, then like you said with Bernie Sanders and with Mueller and stuff like that, where it is such a slippery slope to where if you like, there are so many people look at Trump's administration that in a heartbeat would be like, oh, hey, we can use this thing now and we don't have to prove anything. So we're going to accuse all these people of different things. And just like, and they always find a way to abuse that. So just the priority is making it so it cannot be abused while still working for the people who desperately need it.
Absolutely.
And so I think we've gone in such a good direction in terms of not immediately, because it used to be a lot of the time oh, I like this person they're accusing things of, so I'm not going to believe the person that. And I've seen that there's that Michael Jackson documentary that premiered recently. I saw so many people that were the total other side of that coin that were just like, Michael was amazing, and how like these people are saying he did these bad things. I will never in a million years believe them. And it's just like that's
Hey,
the other
hey,
shitty
hey,
end of
hey, hey,
that.
hey, but dude, he made the Thriller album. So,
Oh shit, that's right. Oh, he can
but yeah, no,
diddle whoever he wants in that case.
but yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Where, um,
So I think
yeah,
the main thing is like don't count out anyone immediately. If someone makes a like a very big claim like that, then take it seriously, because I think that has been such a major problem, is that they are so rarely taken seriously. And even when they are, and they're like, I'm from, middle of nowhere Ohio, and the news every other day is, oh, this football player, this star football player, was accused of rape and found guilty, so they have to do community service for a week or something, like some shit like that. And it's
yeah,
just like, please take these people seriously, give it the due process, and actually put in the effort to figure out what the fuck happened. And again, it was that pendulum swing of like, instead of automatically believing the accused, we automatically believe the accuser, and that will be the end of us if we just let
yeah.
that be the whole process.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, it's a subtle balance of course, if someone has a claim like that, you of course have to, comfort the person and not assume that it's
Yeah,
correct immediately, but you have to take it seriously where it warrants an investigation, which is something
yeah,
that, yeah, like it needs to be, it just needs to be adhered to for sure. But
yeah.
let's put a pause on that. And dude, like this has been like the most roundabout podcast. We talked about like a bunch of shit. We went through like
Oh yeah,
45 minutes on objective versus subjective truths. We went through the Last Jedi, Birdman. This has been a good one, man. I'm glad you came on. We got
me
along
too.
famously, even though you're you know you like a shitty SJW cuck fluoride movie, but that's
Pope, but he's perfect.
all right. Well, tell the people who are watching this where they can find you.
Make stuff on YouTube. You might have to scroll down a bit for that. Turns out other people make stuff on YouTube. But yeah, I do video essays, also comics I've made in the past. That's all on the patreon.com/make stuff studio. There's a lot of public stuff on there. And at Jonathan Oscar. Good luck spelling that. Uh but yeah, on Twitter you can find me.
All
That's
right.
about it.
Word, man. Well, yeah, let's definitely do this sooner rather than later. This is awesome. And
Yep.
yeah, like let's keep it objective going in the future, okay?
Yeah. This was, I'm happy to say that we found the first objectively good thing, and it was this podcast. We did it. Finally did it.
All right, Lone Chemist Podcast. This has objectively been episode 21. Peace the F out.